Back here on News Radio 1270 and 106.7 FM. Joining me for the next half hour or so, we have Dr. Tom Coburn is on the phone with us. Good morning, Doctor. How's it going today?
It's going great. Good to be with you, Vic.
Glad to have you on. Now, once again, Dr. Tom Coburn, for those of you who don't know, Dr. Coburn, he is a native of Casper, Wyoming, correct?
That's right.
All right.
I was born there.
All right. So he was born there, but he spent most of his time, or at least recently, in Oklahoma. You were a representative for Oklahoma. You were also a senator for Oklahoma. And taking a look at my notes here, let's see. You were in office as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives for the Oklahoma 2nd District from 95 till 2001. You said you took 4 years off to continue working on your practice as a general physician. And then also from January of 2005 through January of 2015, you were a United States Senator for Oklahoma as well, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Now, you are a Republican, and today we're going to talk about the Convention of States Project. We'll get to that in just a second. But currently, you're with the Manhattan Institute for Policy Research. Tell me what that is and what exactly you do with them.
Well, Manhattan does research in terms of free enterprise, capitalism, and constitutional republicanism. In other words, we have a constitutional republic, and so it's a large nonprofit that does research and puts out research papers and studies in those areas. And I work mainly in food and drug, prescription drugs, and healthcare portions of that for them.
All right.
I'm a senior fellow for them.
All right, so definitely in your wheelhouse in that regard there.
Right.
Now, let's see, you support term limits, you support gun rights and the death penalty. I'm just taking a look at some notes here on Wikipedia, and tell me if any of this is wrong, because we can't always trust Wikipedia, but most of the time in this stuff they're accurate. And you actually term limited yourself. What do you consider a good term limit for a U.S. Senator or House of Representative?
Well, I think that's up to the individual states that they can decide that. As a matter of fact, 24 states did decide that, and the Supreme Court said we didn't have the right to do that. We put a limit on our members of the House and Senate in Oklahoma, Arkansas, and 20-some other states. And in a case against Arkansas, the Supreme Court decided 5-4 that American people in their individual states couldn't decide that. So I'm adamant about it because what it does is it focuses members back on the big issues that are the real disease that's hurting our country rather than the partisan politics of getting reelected all the time.
Totally understand that. Now, you're here to talk about the Convention of States Project. First off, tell us what the Convention of States Project is, and before we get to that, if anyone wants to call in, you can, 682-1270, 682-1270 to talk to Dr. Coburn. But what is the Convention of States Project, sir?
Well, let me give you a little background. Today we have $20 trillion worth of debt. We have $124 trillion of unfunded liabilities that will be due in the next 50 years. So we have liabilities and debt that is 1.5 times the entire worth of the country. The other component that is worrisome is the total debt, the government debt, the state government debt, the county debt, the citizens' debt, the corporate debt, and city debt totals 280% of our GDP. And if you go look at history, there was a book written about 5-6 years ago by two professors from Harvard called This Time It's Different, which is a kind of a play on words because they say it's not going to be different. No country has ever survived that.
I'm sorry. Sorry, say that. Yeah, you broke up a little bit. Say that again for me.
Okay. No country ever survived that amount of debt.
Okay.
Period. In 800 years.
Wow.
No country has survived that. And for us ought to be is, how do we fix that since Washington obviously isn't working on the real problems? They're working on the symptoms. They're not working to get a balanced budget amendment. They're not working to limit spending. Matter of fact, they just raised spending and took the debt limit off for the next 6 months so they can spend as much as they want. Working on fixing Social Security so that the promises made to those people who really need it, it'll be there. It'll be bankrupt in 2030. Medicare is out of control, $100 billion worth of fraud a year, and it's not affordable either because the taxes aren't covering it. So who's really working on the real problems? And the answer is nobody. They just continue to do the same thing thinking they'll get a different result. We know that isn't the case. And what it means to the 85 million Americans who are known as millennials is a marked decreased standard of living. So that's the problem.
You know,
well, can you fix that in Washington? And my assessment after being there 16 years is you can't, because we have career politicians, most of whom, other than Wyoming's a great exception, most have never had another job other than politics. 65% of the Senate's never had a job outside of politics.
Wow.
Who's going to fix that? And so our founders were really smart. In the Constitution, when they first were putting it together, the only thing that was not argued was the fact that the states ought to have the right to call an amendments convention and fix it, because here's what Colonel George Mason stood up and said. Do you know of any time in the history of the world that a government has voluntarily ceded its power back to its people? And, of course, it's never occurred. It's never happened. And so they put in Article 5, and initially it didn't allow the Senate and the House to offer amendments. It only allowed the states. And so what the Convention of States project is the way which we are allowed by our founders to actually fix the real problems in Washington. And all you have to do is look at the last 7-8 months in Washington. What's happened? What they've done is raise the debt limit, spend more money, not cut any of the waste, fraud, and abuse, which is about $400 billion a year, and not fix any of the long-term problems facing our country. So the Convention of States is about getting 34 states to agree that we ought to have this convention just to make recommendations back to the states on things that might fix the federal government, like a balanced budget amendment, like term limits, like limiting the scope and jurisdiction of the federal government. You may not be aware of it, but in about 48 states out of the 50, 60% of the money that you actually raise in your state that goes through your legislature is controlled not by your legislature, but is controlled by federal bureaucracies in Washington who've never been elected to do anything. So in Wyoming, when you build a road, if you use all state money and no federal dollars, you can build a road for 33% less than if you use $1 of federal government money, because of all the rules, all the regulations, all the garbage that comes out of bureaucracy in Washington that doesn't make sense.
Wow.
But we can't do that because we need what we've sent to Washington to come back to us to build our roads, right?
Right.
So now it's more expensive. Plus, they use prevailing wage, where the wage in Massachusetts, they apply that same wage to Wyoming. Well, that's ridiculous. And you don't have to have prevailing wage if you're using your own money.
Now, if I remember correctly, I think we've had one of our local representatives, Scott Clement, here before talking about the Convention of States project, and another representative as well. And correct me if I'm wrong, if the states, what is it, 3/4 of states need to vote to agree to have it, correct?
No, 2/3.
2/3.
2/3 need to.
2/3.
To have
okay, so 2/3 vote need to have it, but it can only be on that one topic that they vote on, correct? It's not an umbrella thing, right?
No, it's very limited. Matter of fact, there's lots of jurisprudence that sets the standards for that, and it can only be on, for example, on what we're applying for is 3 areas: term limits, fiscal responsibility, and limitation of scope and jurisdiction, i.e. redefining the Commerce Clause so that the Department of Transportation can't tell you how to build a highway in Wyoming. You all know how to build highways. You don't need some idiot in Washington telling you what to do.
Mm-hmm. So how close have you gotten for that to happen?
We're at 12 states. I think we'll get 8 or 9 states. We can't be considered in Wyoming again until, I think, 2019. But we have every intention to raise the awareness. We have 2.4 million volunteers in the United States right now helping us with this. Every legislative district in the country has a district captain that is working on this to get more volunteers. We're going to have to fix our country ourselves. Washington obviously isn't going to fix it. And so the sooner we realize that. The other thing I'd like to address with you is this is safe, because the only things that can be considered in a convention is what you apply for. And you heard a lot of the far gun rights. And by the way, I passed more Second Amendment protections than any senator in the history of the country while I was there. I got the highest honor that the National Rifle Association can give. But some people say, well, you'll take away the Second Amendment. Well, what they don't realize is, first of all, anything that's outside of what the scope is of the application can't ever get sent to the states for consideration. Now, the assumption is that 38 states would vote to take away your Second Amendment.
Right.
That's ridiculous. That isn't ever going to happen. So this is first of all, this is the best option with the ability to solve the biggest problem we have, which is an out-of-control, non-responsive, fiscally irresponsible federal government. Now, and if you really want to fix our country and you love your grandkids, then you'll help us do this.
Now, I've got a question for you. You said you have 12 states on board right now. You're planning on getting another 8, correct?
I think we have 12 states on board.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll pass 8 this next legislative cycle. That'll put us at 20.
Okay.
I think we'll pass 8 the next year. Wyoming will be back up in 19. And that'll put us at 28. We don't even have to get to 34.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as the Congress sees that the states are getting ready to have an amendments convention, you know what they're going to do? They're going to pass term limits.
Right.
They're going to pass a balanced budget. They're going to limit the Commerce Clause.
Now,
they're going to do
my question,
because they don't want us to take their power away.
Now, my one question I have for you is, of the 12 states you have right now, how big a factor are party lines? So, for example, let's say, I don't know what states you have, but let's say you had Texas, probably well-known Republican state. Do you have like a state like New York that's a well-known Democratic state? What's the party lines like on this?
Well, in lots of states, I think we'll pass Ohio next year, and we have bipartisan sponsorship there. Many of the states in Kansas, we haven't passed it yet, but we have bipartisanship there. In Kentucky, we have bipartisanship. We passed Indiana bipartisan. There's no question that the hard left, it doesn't want this. They want the government to make every decision for you.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't want it returned to the states. I was in New Hampshire and Maine last month. I think we got a good shot, especially in Maine. Maybe not New Hampshire, but more so in Maine than New Hampshire, because people get it.
Mm-hmm.
Look, you can't keep spending your kids' money and it not have an impact on them.
Totally understand.
You cannot have the federal government borrowing at the level. Remember, what we're borrowing at now is 1/3 the average cost of what our usual borrowing costs are. The Federal Reserve has already said within the next year, including this one, there's going to be at least 4 rate hikes.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that's going to? That's going to cost about $200 billion a year in interest costs for the federal government. Just those 4 rate hikes.
Mm.
The historical average is 6.8%. We're paying about 2.5 right now.
Honestly, I'm 33 years old. I don't plan on Social Security being around, and if it is, it's definitely not going to be a huge impact on my retirement down the road. I don't plan on it being there.
Well, that's the small thing.
Yeah.
That's the small thing. Listen, the Government Accountability Office has documented $400 billion worth of waste. I passed a bill forcing them to document the waste. And everybody, from Nancy Pelosi to Dick Durbin to all the Republicans, said, God, that's right. We need to fix that. So I wrote bills to try to fix it. You know what happened?
What?
Got very few helpers.
Mm-hmm.
You know why? Because waste has a constituency.
Right.
Crony capitalism has a constituency. Fraud has a constituency. So there's $400 billion that's documented every year that's waste, and that doesn't include $50 billion in the Pentagon. Now, and I'm all for us having the strongest military. So just think, if you had $450 billion more a year right now that wasn't spent on stupidity,
mm-hmm.
you could fund a good portion of Social Security and Medicare with that.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this: you've been out of you've been out of Congress for about 2 years or so now, almost three.
Right.
Almost three. How do you feel being someone that's been in there for a while but now out? How do you feel President Donald Trump is doing? And before you answer that, you brought up the term career politician. You yourself term limited yourself. Here in Wyoming, of course, John Barrasso is a doctor by trade. I'm sure you know John Barrasso very well. In Wyoming, Senator Enzi was he owned shoe stores here in the state. Of those two, of course, we all know Liz Cheney is of the Cheney family, Vice President Cheney, so on and so forth. But of those two, definitely 2 out of 3 definitely are not career politicians, and I'm not going to say that Liz Cheney's going to be a career politician. But how do you feel a guy that is kind of really breaking the mold of what is considered a career politician as our president right now? And how do you feel he's been doing so far in everything that we've been talking about this morning?
Well, I love what he's done on judges. I love what he's doing on regulations. He's doing that all within the executive branch because Congress won't help him. He's starting to work on health care, which I'm glad he's starting to do it since Congress can't seem to get its act together. He is working on immigration policy. And remember, immigration policy isn't about immigration. It's about the rule of law. Here's what the law says. It's sworn to protect and uphold the law. He's doing that. Obama did not do that. So the fact is if he would quit tweeting and stepping on his message all the time, he'd be at 55 or 60% popularity. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing is the people that voted for him are highly enamored with what he has done. Not how he's done it, but what he has done. So, if you'll note, I said earlier that Wyoming's an exception because you have 2 people who have actually had a career before coming to Washington.
Mm-hmm. You know what? Hold on one second. Let's see if we go to the phones here. We might have someone on the phone. You're here apparently they are not there. So we'll just keep on talking. We'll talk with you for a couple more minutes. Now, first off, we've been talking about the Convention of States Project. Where can someone find out more information about the Convention of States Project? Online,
right.
Facebook, and all that stuff?
Well, easy. Online is conventionofstates.com.
Mm-hmm.
It'll get all the questions you could ever come up with are answered there. I wrote a book called Smashing the D.C. Republic. It's all about the history of conventions, how they work, why this is safe, what we can accomplish, and everybody else that's working on Convention of States have different things. Like there's just a term limits one. There's just a balanced budget one. Both of those by themselves won't fix what's wrong with us. So that's why we're doing 3 things. But the fact is you can buy that book. That's on Amazon and all the other websites at WMD. You can read that book and you'll actually learn the history of what's going on. The third thing you can do is, after you've looked at it and studied it, is join us as a grassroots movement with 2.4 million of us doing it.
Now, in order to join you, I'm guessing you can go on the website and become a representative for this area of the state or other ways as well, maybe monetary donations. How does that work?
That works. You can become a volunteer, which means you just go and lobby your legislator to, hey, let's fix our country. Let's do what our founders told us to do. And you can do that. The average contribution to Convention of States is less than $70. So, most people don't make big contributions. And that's fine. We're working in every state across the country. There's not one state we're not trying to get this accomplished in. So I think here's what I think will happen around Wyoming this next year. I think Nebraska will pass it. I think South Dakota will pass it. I think Iowa will pass it. I think Idaho will pass it. I think Utah will pass it. I think Mississippi will pass it. I think Arkansas will pass it. I can't remember who else I've missed. I think Ohio will pass it, and I think North Carolina will pass it, and I think Michigan will pass it. So I think we've got a big shot at getting 8 to 10 this next year, and then that puts us. Then we're really getting close. We have 7 sitting senators have endorsed what we're doing. Mm-hmm. They agree that the government needs to be downsized and the freedom needs to be brought back. Remember, our founders never intended for the federal government to be involved in every aspect of your life. They were to be limited and powerful, but they were to be powerful because their job was to protect the Constitution and to protect us in terms of defense, and leave everything that's in the 10th Amendment. If you'll read it, it'll say everything that's not explicitly spelled out for the federal government in the enumerated powers is reserved for the states and the people. Well, they've abandoned the enumerated powers 25, 30 years ago, actually in 1930.
Of course, tell us one more time, what's the website to find out more information about the Convention of States Project?
Conventionofstates.com and Smashing the D.C. Republic.
That's the name of your book, correct?
Right.
Okay. Now, so Wyoming is up for this, you said in 2018 or 2019?
19. We can't do anything in Wyoming. We lost. We passed committee in the House, and we lost on the floor vote in the House. Okay. And so we just didn't have enough volunteers there to actually convince their legislators. And there was this, there's scare tactics with this. People will say, well, oh my goodness, you can't do this. Well, our founders intended for us to do this. And it's essentially totally safe. Here's what's not safe, Vic. Continuing not to fix the real problems. That's what's not safe for our kids and our grandkids. If you're only 33, you may or may not get Social Security, but I can guarantee your kids will have a standard of living 30% below you if we don't fix things.
I believe it.
So we ought to be about fixing things.
I believe it. So, once again, check out the Convention of States Project, all the information you need. And now, so in 2019, what happens in 2019 for Wyoming?
Well, it's just it can come back up.
Okay.
The way your legislature does a budget year and then a legislative year. And so 2019 will be a legislative year, and we can introduce it again and hopefully have a better grassroots effort to get it changed.
All right. So,
but here, one last point with you. If in fact you're sick and tired of seeing the federal government waste money, do stuff that doesn't seem right, interfere in the issues of Wyoming, telling you what to do, 60% of what your state legislator votes on, Washington's actually telling them what to do. If you want to change that, you can't complain anymore unless you help us do it this way, because there's not another way. And if we're going to do it, we have to do it. And so we need to be about it now. And so we need people. Don't complain anymore if you're not going to get active and be one of these people that will at least call your state senator or state representative and say, hey, here's a way to fix our country. How about getting after it?
Right. Once again, speaking with Dr. Coburn. Dr. Coburn, thanks for taking the time with us. We're talking about the Convention of States Project. And one more time, what is your website?
Conventionofstates.com.
All right. Quick and easy. Dr. Coburn, thanks for talking with us. You have a great day, sir. Back here on Wake Up Wyoming. So earlier this morning, last hour, we were talking with, was it the 8 o'clock hour? Yes, it was. It's all blurred this morning. We were talking with Dr. Tom Coburn, former Republican senator of Oklahoma. We were talking about the Convention of States. Definitely an interesting conversation. And definitely an interesting topic as well. Now, there was someone that was trying to call in a couple times. Apparently, we were having some phone difficulties. I purposely tested the phones with Eric this morning because I knew when Tom was calling in, we'd try and get people to call in as well. And apparently, we'll have to have the engineer look at it. But the person that was calling was Rod Guile. He is the Wyoming State Director for the Wyoming or Convention of States Wyoming, basically the Wyoming chapter for the Convention of States, and Tom was talking about it, how Wyoming is up for the chance for this in 2019. If you wanted to find out more details about the Convention of States, and once again, the Convention of States, they are a project, and they're focusing on only 3 areas: term limits, fiscal responsibility, and narrowing the scope of the federal government. They are having their, I forgot to ask Rod. I should have asked him if it was a monthly meeting or every quarter or how often they meet. But they're meeting tonight at Pokey's at 7 p.m. there in the back, apparently. So if you are interested in everything we were talking about with Dr. Coburn earlier this morning, and you wanted more information about it, the Wyoming chapter, I guess you could say, of the Convention of States are meeting tonight at 7 p.m. at Pokey's. So swing on down and talk with them. I'm sure it's free to get in there and hear what they're talking about. If you need more information about the Convention of States, and specifically the Wyoming portion of it, by the way, the website, conventionofstates.com, and then you can also, I'm sure, email Rod. He'd love to hear from you if you wanted more information, you wanted questions. Once again, Rod is the Wyoming State Director. It is Rod.Guile, I believe that's how you pronounce his last name, Rod.Geil at cosaction.com. So Rod.Geil at cosaction.com if you wanted more information about the Convention of States and what's happening in the grassroots section of it here in Wyoming. So sorry we couldn't get Ron on. I promise we'll have our engineer look at it. I promise I also tested it this morning because I knew we wanted to get some phone calls in. And Eric and I got it working fine this morning before I went on the air live, but who knows? You know how technology is these days. So Rod was actually Rod is the guy that was in with us with Scott Clem. We talked about this, the Convention of States. I would say it was probably a month or two in that I was on the show. So probably around, I don't know, maybe April or May, we were talking about it. But once again, if you want more information on everything we're talking about in the 8 o'clock hour earlier this morning, go to conventionofstates.com. You know, honestly, I think it's an interesting thing. And I try not to. I understand. I know this is the news talk station here in the building. I try not to talk politics too much, and I try to stay as neutral as I can. And honestly, I would consider myself a moderate, so that's why I have no problem doing it. I try not to get carried away on either side. Like I've told you before, I voted for Democrat. I voted for Republican. This is a show where I want both sides in on whatever the topic is.